Today we're going to be doing a traditional install with a center part. I'm going to walk you through how I'm going to prep her hair, how we're going to do the foundation of her cornrows, how I apply a protective net, and then how we stitch and style to achieve a flawless traditional install. Let's get started. In order to get started, you're going to need a red tail comb. You're going to need a few clips for your sectioning, braiding hair, some type of moisturizer to apply to the hair while you're braiding. I'm personally going to use the edge control to just kind of help glide while I am cornrolling her hair. You're going to need a protective net, some shears, and then your bundles of choice. Today I'm going to use 3 bundles from Complex Hair. This is the Brazilian straights in lengths 18, 20, and 20. Alright, let's get to it. Okay, so before you get started with the braid down, you want to take the time to analyze your client's hair to determine where they want their part, how much leave out you're going to want to do, and what other techniques you may need to use based on their hair. So what I know about Kiana's hair is that it's nice and thick, but when you press it out, it gets a little fine, so we have to leave a little bit more out. And then also, she has a undercut in the back, which means we'll have to use like a doubling technique in the back to compensate for the nape area that's missing. So since we're establishing the center part, we're going to use our right tail comb, have the client pull her hair back a little bit so that you can see, and then just section it out. And as far as her edges, we're going to leave out a tiny amount. But the way that we're going to stitch her hair today is going to conceal her edges. So you really don't have to leave any out if you don't want to, but I'm going to leave out just a little bit. Okay. Now that we established her leave out, you're going to use your moisturizer on the hair to give the hair some type of moisture, especially since it's going to be braided up for a few months. So I'm going to take a generous amount of this protein cream and just simply apply it to her hair. Now we're going to move on to the sectioning. What I like to do is do a fine part near her leave out and then another one to connect going all the way around her head. A technique that I like to use is using a small crochet needle and putting my braiding hair inside of my first cornrow. What this does is provides a super flat anchor for the braid down pattern that allows this part to just lay flawless, and when the braids start to grow out, it's no separation with your with the way that the hair is growing out. So I'll show you how I do it. So I just put my very small crochet needle through, loop the hair through, and pull it. And when using this method, you want to make sure you're not using a lot of tension because it can be a little tight. So what I like to do is kind of simulate my braid about 3 times before I begin to grab all the hair and start my cornrow. That way I can ensure that my anchor braid is still flat. we're all done with our braiding pattern. We did a beehive. So like I said, I used a small braid. I did a small braid around her perimeter. I used my crochet needle to do this perimeter braid, and then I just brought it all around in a circle. So now that that's done, you always want to make sure you use some type of oil to hydrate the scalp. This is just a oil that I picked up at a farmer's market from a black owned company. It has some rosemary in it. It's really good for growth and hydration. So just putting it all throughout our scalp. Can you believe how many clients say that their stylist forgets to put oil on their hair? That's something simple that's beneficial for the hair, but that can make or break the client deciding to come back to you. So make sure you oil that scalp. So we have this little braid that's still hanging out. We're going to tuck it within her cornrow and then stitch it down before we apply the protective net. I always like to use a protective net when I'm doing an install because it just allows the hair to lay flatter, to stay in place a little longer, and then sometimes depending on the way in which the hair starts to grow out, I've noticed on certain clients the leave out in the track hair can begin to like mat up, especially if this client sweats a lot or shampoos their hair a lot. So you want to make sure you use a net. Now there's different types of nets out here. I like to use the basic minimal stretch lightweight net. So yeah, I'm going to ask my client to hold this. You don't want this part to be really tight because if your cornrows are tight, your net is tight, and then your stitching is tight, the process is going to be a little too uncomfortable for your client, and you can ultimately break off their hair. So you want to make sure that you make this secure but not too tight. Now that the protective net is on, we're going to start with the stitching. Keep in mind that we have this undercut in the back. But this first track, I'm going to show you how I stitch it to where if she wanted to pull her hair up in a ponytail, that she wouldn't see the actual stitching. Now, while we didn't leave out any hair in the back, the goal is for her to not put it into a ponytail. But if she did want to do a low ponytail, you wouldn't see any tracks. So I'm going to pre-measure this and then cut it. And then the rest, I'm going to flip over until I get to the top. So I started off by tacking my track down, going through the weft along the edge 3 times. And then I'm going through the weft and underneath the cornrow. So as you see, I'm putting my needle through the weft and I'm tucking my needle underneath the cornrow, and this will allow for a seamless flat edge. Now this technique is perfect when you're trying to conceal tracks. It's something about going underneath that cornrow when you're just trying to have that no weft look. This is also great to use when you're doing half up, half down, and your client doesn't want to leave any hair out. So you're always going to make sure you go through that weft to secure it, and then underneath the cornrow. Follow this method all the way around this first row. Also, if your client does leave out hair and they want to wear a ponytail, also use this method.
I'm going to show you what it looks like when I lift this track up, and it is flawless. You see no track. This first track is done, and look, it is seamless. If she wanted to put it up in a ponytail, she would be able to. It's like you don't see any tracks, but you don't really know what you see. So try this technique, it'll work every time. I'm starting this track off by slightly curving it. So I'm going underneath the track a few times, just straight up. And then when I get to the end, I'm going to go through the weft and then still putting it underneath that cornrow, just like I did with the first track. And that's how I secure the ends of all of my installs. So as far as this stitching method that I'm using, it's super simple and it's the easiest one thus far. You just want to stitch upward and straight through, no fancy loops. And you want to do it close together, and this allows one, for when your client is taking their install out, for it to just simply remove fast. And then also stitching upward allows the install to overall be flatter. I've noticed when you stitch upward going down, then the install can sometimes be a little bit bulky, but that is faster than simply going upward. So try this method all the way around. Just do simple loops close together around the head, and I promise you this install is going to be flat and secure.
So what I'm doing here is using my flat iron to kind of flatten out the wefts. Sometimes wefts can be really thick, and using a little bit of heat on the weft can allow the weft to just not be as thick, and for your needle to go in between the weft a little easier. Try that. So I'm going to double this last track before I begin to curve my tracks, and this doubling will make up for her undercut.
When I begin with a new needle and a new track, I always make sure that I secure the tracks by putting my needle through the weft, just to ensure that my tracks are together and that it will stay. And so I'm starting this track off by first going underneath the weft, and then I'm going to go through the braid to ensure that that track is in place. And then I'm just going to follow the same technique that I did on the other two rows by simply stitching straight up.
The goal for this track is to position it in a way where it covers her edges and the hair can fall towards her face. So as you see, I'm not doing any fancy stitching, just I'm making sure my stitching is closer together. So what you want to do, of course, is start off by putting the needle through the track, secure it at least 2 times, and then place the track where you want it to go. So I'm not putting it right at the start of my first braid because I like at least 1 to 2 tracks to lay horizontally. That way it can fall to cover this track. So I'm leaving about a centimeter away from the part, from that first braid. And then I'm hooking my needle underneath. So for the first time, I'm going underneath the weft. The second time, I'm going underneath. And then the third time, I'm going to go through that weft. Okay. Now, I'm just going to do simple loops close together.
So again, when doubling tracks, you want to make sure that those tracks are together, and you want to continue to hold the tracks in place to ensure proper placement. So this part is pretty repetitive, but as you see, I'm just doing my stitching close together. I'm not doing anything fancy, and I'm simply stitching up. And you can see just how flat this method would get you, but also how secure that it will be. And as you can see here, my thread is about to run out. So what I do is in the same spot, I just stitch upward several times, and then maybe once or twice I'll go through the weft, but I do this until I cannot do it anymore. So here I'm using that same method where I'm just stitching up. When I get to my corners, I hold it in place so it can be straight. And then I slowly begin to curve with stitching underneath that cornrow. That will still allow for that seamless look that we were doing with that beginner track. And then when I'm getting to the end, I cut one track a little shorter than the other so that it won't be bulky at that point. And what I also do is I hold the track in my hand to create some resistance so that I'm not applying a lot of tension to my client's hair, because as you know, those are really fine points and you don't want to apply too much pressure because we are not done yet. So I'm simply finishing up this piece of thread right here. I'm going to stitch it several times until I cannot do it anymore to secure my track. Now this is how it should look. This is a great method to use also if your client's hair is shorter. I'm going to sew the remainder of these tracks horizontally at a slight curve, since we already created that waterfall effect in the front by extremely curving that perimeter braid. So I doubled the back, and now the rest of these I'm going to single. Now, I know that I cut a lot of the wefts, and a lot of clients do not like to cut their wefts, but in some cases, when the client is striving for a super seamless flat install, especially in the front, you're going to have to cut the weft. Now, when you do it yourself, and if they're going for the same type of install the next time, it's really easy to measure out those exact pieces as long as they do not want to cut their hair in a lot of layers. You'll be okay with cutting the tracks. I always cut some of them. I wouldn't have cut as many if she did not have that undercut in the back, but because I was doing special placement for her, I had to cut along the weft. So don't forget to pull out your flat iron in order to flatten that weft. This is what I do to create that super flat edge. So when I am flipping my tracks back, what I do is sew through both of the wefts just to ensure that it is super secure and flat, because you don't want bulky hair if you're going to use this method. And so as you can see, I did switch up my stitching techniques up here. One, like I said before, this is a little faster, but it's also another way to ensure a secure stitch. So just kind of look closely at what I'm doing. I'm looping it from the top through the weft, and then I am pulling it around my needle. So just look really closely at what I'm doing. When you get to the top of the client's head, do not be afraid to move your client's head or ask them to tilt their head, because your body position and your ability to see is vital when you get to the top. So look closely as I'm still slightly curving the tracks, because ultimately our goal is to cover that first track that we created, but then also for the hair to fall towards the face. And this is how it will look up close. You see why I left like a centimeter at the top in order to conceal that first track that we extremely curved. Now you cannot see that track, and that top track will fully cover that baby.
So now that we're in the last track, the goal is to make sure that this one is super flat and the stitches are really close together. So let me show you. We've just finished installing her hair, and now it's time to frame her face before we start the styling process. So I'm using a razor comb. I have a cutting comb, a rat tail comb. I have my Kimber working spray, my wax stick. I always like to use a serum. This is the Garnier Fructis. And I have a Silkening Seal spray by Care. My 1.5 inch curling iron. And then I'm also using a 1 inch flat iron. So before we start the framing, as you can see, this hair is covering her face, so we don't need to do much. Because of how this hair is falling, her natural hair would cover and it would blend, so we don't really need to do layers. But because we're going to curl her hair and really just customize this look more for her, we're going to put some slight layers in the front. So you're going to take your razor comb. You kind of going to establish first how long you want these layers. So my goal is for the front layer to kind of stop underneath her chin and still give her a long layered effect. So what you're going to do, you're going to turn your client towards you, pull out this first vertical section, and then you're going to over direct it in front of the face like that. You want to make sure your client's head is facing forward. So I'm going to over direct that hair. See, I'm starting right underneath the chin, and then you're going to slice. Pick up your guide again, over direct, and slice. Over direct, slice. Now to this section.
So what I'm doing now is just creating long layers throughout the top of her hair. So what you want to do is pull hair from the back and put it to the front where your guide meets. A razor comb is something really good to add to your kit if you want to create soft layers. Sometimes using shears can leave really harsh marks that can be hard to blend out, so you want to use a razor comb. And just follow your traveling guide to the front, and this will ensure seamless layers throughout. And you always want to pull the hair to make sure that your hair is symmetrical.
Okay, now that we're done with the layers, we're going to define her part and smooth out the top and then curl. So I'm going to use a little bit of serum for leave out, and I'm going to take small sections and smooth it out. I'm also going to use a little bit of this wax in the front of her hairline, because if I can avoid using edge control, I will. Wax allows the hair to stay smoother longer because it's heavy. So I always go in and smooth out my edges first. Now, use my smaller sections and then smooth. I'm going to use my camera working spray and just spray throughout her hair. I'm also going to take my silkening mist and do about 3 pumps. So we're going for smooth curls that really just light, flowy, kind of sexy hair. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna start in the back of her hair and we're gonna do vertical sections. Now that the curls are all in, we're just gonna let the hair set. So what I did was I put a little bit of serum on my hands and I put it on her leave out. And now I'm gonna go back one more time and lightly spray. So if you wanted, your client could be done, right? But we're going for pretty loose, lightweight curls. So what I'm gonna do is just use my hands and comb through the hair. I'm actually gonna use a comb because that's the look we're going for. So we're now all done with the styling process. I hope that you really learned a lot from this video. I hope that you go back and re-watch the way that I position my hands, the way that I position my body, the way that I frame the face, the way that I lay the tracks in order to achieve this flawless traditional install. Traditional installs is one way to grow your clientele, grow your client's hair, and keep your schedule full. So thank you again for watching our video on mastering the basic traditional install.